Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our book club discussion. This is our second of three book discussions this season, our fifth season. And the book that we're discussing tonight, The Birds That Audubon Missed, I just wanted to emphasize the subtitle, Discovery, Discovery and Desire in the American Wilderness. That's a
Mm.
good phrase about what this book is about. And it is by Kenn Kaufman, and he spells his name a little bit unusually, so I have underlined his N's because I have gotten it wrong a couple times. And I want to make sure I've got the right number of N's in the right place. Let's see, why is it this thing? I'm looking to advance my next slide here. There we go. If you haven't read the book, it should work out fine. Hope you'll find the discussion to be very interesting. And as Nancy said, we'd like to encourage discussion. I think, Nancy, from the way my screen is and seeing the different tiles of people, I may ask you then to call on people. It's hard for me to see everybody with my screen.
Oh, sure. Yeah, either that you can unmute yourselves and or type something into the chat if you would like to mention something about the book the part of the book that you've read, something that interested you, something that you were really surprised about. Anybody have anything that you want to add right now?
Yeah.
Well, I know I am going to begin.
Okay.
What I really enjoyed about the book was the way Mr. Kaufman added his own little takes. He had these chapters called Interlude, channeling the illustrator, because of course we know that Kenn Kaufman does a lot of illustrating as well too. And I just love the way he took what Audubon had done and some of the other naturalists, Wilson and Townsend, and twisted it or brought it to the forefront. One of them was that doesn't have a chapter number, but it's on page 256. It's materials and methods. And what he does, what Kenn Kaufman does is talk about the materials that Audubon used. The largest paper that he could get his hands on, which was part of the elephant folio, large sheets of paper, and also very high quality paper too. And then he talks about the drawings themselves done in pastels, watercolor, so just a lot of different ways. Now, then he adds, what would Audubon do now if Audubon were here? Um, I'm sure he would get some high quality papers. High quality papers are still made. Would he be using pastel still? Would he use colored pencils? Would he be using some other media? Uh, I would guess, and if Audubon had a laptop, he'd probably be using some kind of drawing format too. So it's just interesting how he brings this all together. And I that's one thing I really enjoyed reading about.
Yeah. And
Whatever's
speaking,
trendy at the time is what he would use.
I'm sorry, what's that, Claudia?
Whatever's trendy at the time is what he would use and then move on to the next thing.
Absolutely.
and speaking of illustrations, the cover of the book does have illustrations of the birds that Kenn Kaufman painted, the birds that Audubon missed. And within the book, too, there are 8 pages of his illustrations in color, and they are quite beautiful. I was trying to find a way to bring them into the discussion, and I just couldn't find a way to extract those pictures from the book. So But here is Kenn Kaufman, and he is also a writer. He's co-authored or authored 13 books, several of which are field guides. And of his many jobs over the year, one has been being an editor and consultant for the National Audubon Society. And one of his jobs was to very carefully review Audubon's monumental The Birds of America, all the plates and pictures, as well as the text and descriptions of birds called ornithological biography. So he became extremely familiar with Audubon's works and got to know them very well, and then could make a lot of judgments about them. Also a fellow of the American Ornithological Society. So his field guides cover other topics too: insects, mammals, butterflies. In 1997, he published Kingbird Highway, the biggest year in the life of an extreme birder. And that genre of the big year has become somewhat popular, and we're going to be reading one of those for our April reading. And there's a little map here showing Oak Harbor, where Kenn Kaufman lives. And as he says in the book, he's about 5 miles from McGee Marsh and the boardwalk, and he's quite envied by his peers who live elsewhere in the springtime. So I wanted to say a little bit about his background in art, and there's not a whole lot in the book about it. He does talk about his mentor, Roger Tory Peterson, who is considered like the father of the modern field guides. And he's also known as like the other Audubon. He's such a good artist. Kenn's first book was in the Peterson series of books, Field Guide to Advanced Birding. And in that, he used pen and ink drawings. That was about 1991. And Roger Tory Peterson guided him through that. He then started using watercolors, got into using photography, and later got into oil painting, which is, completely different kind of method. But as we talked about, he had studied all of Audubon's plates and the text and knew it very well. And out of that came his idea of, well, Audubon didn't really, even though he tried to get all the birds in America, he was not able to. And Kenn had this idea, maybe I could figure out what those birds were and paint them myself. And then he had also the idea of maybe he could imitate Audubon's style. So that became the seed for this book, and it germinated during COVID. So in a way, COVID kind of helped him because he was confined. So what birds did Audubon actually miss? Here are some of them, not all of them, but Audubon missed the Caspian tern, the gray-cheeked thrush, as well as Swainson's thrush, but in fact, he didn't even really know the difference between them. The thrushes were pretty difficult to sort out, as we find out in that chapter, A Thicket of Thrushes. And I appreciate that Mr. Kaufman does take the time to figure out all the thrushes, and he helped me to get a better grasp of the thrushes. The thick-billed longspur came out of his, he missed that on his very last big trip out west. And then the snail kite he missed, which was in Florida. And he spent time in Florida and loved Florida birding. I found just recently his Facebook page, and here are a couple of entries. The blue jays are just from January 1st this year, and he asks everybody on his Facebook page, well, what was the first bird that you saw in 2025 for him, it was a blue jay. And so I thought I would just ask people tonight, if you can recall, what was the first bird you saw this year?
Again,
thing-
you can unmute or again, toss it into the chat.
I think for me, it's chickadee, but several people had juncos, and that's awesome. Juncos are so cute.
It's a black-capped chickadee for me.
Mm,
Yep, I see juncos listed in the chat. I had cardinals. They are usually an early bird coming to the feeders.
Yellow rump warbler.
Wow,
Oh.
awesome.
Nice bird.
Yeah.
Well, I'm in
That's-
Houston.
Ah, nice. House finch is noted.
Ooh,
Possibly a
hairy.
hairy woodpecker. Usually I have wild turkeys stomping through the yard fairly early on, or at least coming off roost. They roost across the street from where I am. But not that day, not the first of the day of the year. Claudia mentions pileated, but not the first. But they apparently pileateds have been visiting daily. That's pretty nice too. Awesome.
They love our suet that we put out.
Yeah. All right. Drina, what was yours?
Actually, I don't remember,
Oh
to
no.
be honest, but today there were probably at least 12 robins.
Wow.
I was glad to see them.
Yep. Yeah, robins are having a little tough time now because of a lot of the fruit is already gobbled up. So, if you have those uh trees that produce fruits like crab apples and stuff like that, they can hang on. Those persist a little bit, and the robins really like those. I like robins in the wintertime. Sorry, I digress. I'll shut up now.
Oh, thank you, everybody, for sharing. Oh, somebody else had something to say?
Oh, we were talking about the robins and how we haven't seen any. That's really cool that you did. Last year we had a robin make a nest on our porch. So for a while, nobody was allowed to use the front door. And all of them hatched and fledged successfully. So your telling of the robin made me think of that and how hopefully we can help them again this year.
Okay. Well, the other painting here of the flamingos, this is from his Facebook page in November, and he has a little bit of information about it. And usually he has seen flamingos on sand or in ponds, and generally in a much lighter, with lighter background. But in this case, this is from when he was in the Galapagos, and this is a lava background. And he was really taken with the contrast of these flamingos in light against the black lava. So his Facebook page is just, it's very interesting. And I just discovered it and glad I did. Well, I had mentioned earlier in the subtitle contains the word discovery. And I thought that I would share a little bit from the book, and because discovery seems to be so important. So we come into this life as explorers. Every newborn child has the innate drive to take in new information, to discover, to explore. This urge to learn is just as basic as the need to eat and sleep. For many people, the voracious appetite for learning names will gradually fade. Sadly, some may view this diminution as a normal part of growing up. But for those who become fascinated with nature, with the abundance of life outside the bounds of culture, the excitement goes on. I know because I am one of those lucky people. For us, the wonders of nature never disappoint and they never end. And every time we find something new, we want to know what it is. We remain as children, eyes wide, expecting miracles around every corner. I was obsessed with discovery. Then he recounts that a teacher had said to him when he had been talking about an orchard oriole that he saw, she says, you didn't discover that. You can't say it's a discovery unless it's new to science. And as a child, it kind of took him aback. And it's, I think, has stayed with him to some extent because he still considers what he finds to be a discovery and has that enthusiasm. And there's one other section that blew me away, really, and I thought I'd share that too about discovery. And it's at the end of that wonderful chapter, The Fugitive Warblers. And he has just been talking with someone about a hybrid warbler called the Sutton's warbler, which he has never seen, but he hopes to. And this is what he says. That's all right that I haven't seen it. When the warblers are passing through, when every tree may hold surprises, we don't need to find rarities to be satisfied. For the newcomers to birding, each warbler could be an exciting new mystery to solve. For the seasoned watchers, seeing a particular species for the first time this season, or even the first time today, brings its own sense of delight. It's like a treasure hunt of rediscovery. And if we could, we would repeat it every spring forever. It certainly reminds me of going to the boardwalk in spring and seeing the warblers. Wonder if any of you have that same experience of perhaps especially with warblers.
I'm going to add something here, Drina, that, I'm out birding quite a bit. And as I just earlier mentioned, I love to see robins in the wintertime. I don't know why. To me, they just stand out more beautifully. If you ever look at their wings, the way the feathers lay on their wings, everything is just in nice, neat order. They're very boldly marked. I think seems like their breasts and tummies are much more orange. And I just like watching them feed. A lot of people are just it's a robin, blah blah blah, whatever. But I can look at them again and again and again in the winter time. So, and one time I did see a robin drinking water from an icicle that was dripping. And I thought that was the most fascinating thing and so I guess I am like that child that I just want to see everything. And sometimes I'll just stand in the morning or when the snow is falling or when it's raining and just say, wow, this is amazing out here. I hope other people feel that way too.
Birding has like brought us together as a family. Like even my 15-year-old stepdaughter, like she is amazing at identifying birds and she'll use eBird and Merlin on walks. And it's really cool that, from infant to, people in their 40s, like it's really bonding, helping us like bond in a new and different way. And we're like, did you see this bird? And hey, come look out the window. This bird is here. And it's really, really nice what it does to human relationships.
And in the chat we have, yes, I feel the same way. So thank you, everyone. Appreciate the nature lovers out there.
Well, let's look at some of these warblers. These are warblers that Alexander Wilson named. He's considered the discoverer. Of course, they've been discovered long ago by many people, but he has the first naming rights. And so we have, I guess I'd like to ask people if they would like to guess what these warblers are. And we can start up here.
Again, you can jot it in the chat if you know what the warbler is on the top. Well, to me, the top left.
That's a Kentucky warbler.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good job.
My husband's here too, and he got it right away. Kentucky. Okay, how about down here?
That's
Lower
a
left.
magnolia warbler.
Yay.
How about here?
Which one? I'm sorry, I didn't see your pointer. Oh, okay. To the right of the magnolia warbler.
Cerulean.
Yes.
Beautiful.
And how about up here?
And then the one above the cerulean?
It's a bay-breasted.
Yep.
And then over here?
That's a morning.
Yes. Okay. So these are Alexander Wilson's discoveries, and we'll talk about him a little bit. He was a rival for Audubon. So Audubon also had a big sense of awe and mystery with nature. And when he was in Florida, he had been observing flamingos flying above. And he writes this: "Ah, reader, could you but know the emotions that then agitated my breast. I thought I had now reached the height of all my expectations, for my voyage to the Floridas was undertaken in a great measure for the purpose of studying these lovely birds in their own beautiful islands. I followed them with my eyes, watching as it were every beat of their wings." And then we have here too one of his plates from his Birds of America of a flamingo. And I just thought I'd ask people what their comments are about this portrait of a flamingo. And remember, it's 39.5 inches by 29.5 inches. It's huge. Any comments?
I have a comment. This is a general comment for all of his paintings. I'm always
It almost looks a little bit like a scientific illustration with the bird's beak and the foot above the bird. I don't remember him doing that with a lot of other species.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
I
I
can
don't
hear you,
know.
Brittany, but it is pretty soft.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, we're kind of far away. I'm always struck with his paintings with the neck positioning. Like,
Yeah, I'm having a hard time hearing
Sorry.
Brittany.
can you hear me now?
No, not very well.
Oh, I don't know why. Okay, yeah.
What do you think about the pose?
Oh, Brittany mentions that she looks as though the neck position strikes her as odd.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, he wanted to keep things life-size. So even though he has a huge piece of paper, he has to fix the bird in such a way to fit on the page.
Yeah, I think it was chapter 2 that went into that. Like he was like Audubon was criticizing the whole like bird on a dead stick type of drawings, and so he was going to do more like what they were doing in nature. Until then, he just squashed a bunch of birds in smaller pieces of paper, and okay. But yeah, I think it was chapter 2 that really went into detail about Audubon's thought process with this life-size work.
And since some of these birds were so big that he did have to contort them a bit to fit them on that paper, even though it was the biggest paper he could get his hands on, still wasn't quite big enough to get that flamingo's neck upward. But again, I'm amazed at the drawing of the beak and the foot and the tongue as well too. Again, I just don't remember those in some of his other sketches or some of the other artwork that he has. I don't know much about the color. It seems like it's awfully pink.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
that may just be because of the way it was reproduced, on the screen and stuff like that. So, but it's very pink.
Well, I did over exaggerate everything. So
It's rather dramatic too. So he could make a statement. So I thought I would ask people, if you haven't read the book, what do you know about Audubon right now? And if you have read the book, what did you know about Audubon before and then after reading the book?
This is a great question. I'd really like to see some folks jot some things in, even if you haven't read the book. What did you know about Audubon? Well, that you just heard or maybe saw in another article or another book. So have you heard about Audubon? Somebody mentions that Deanne mentions she's known the name and vaguely about the birds of America, but otherwise I was clueless. The book added so much to my knowledge. Claudia mentions before book, problematic individual involved in slave trade. Didn't know
Yep.
much about him personally beyond that. And Brittany says, I didn't know he invented birds. Yeah, he certainly did. He certainly did.
Oh. I didn't know too much about him before either, but I had the sense that he was revered and had a great reputation. And over the past few years at the National Audubon Society, we've been talking about, keeping his name related to his history of owning slaves. Also, he did also with Townsend, another well-known ornithologist, they did dig up graves of Native Americans to study their brains, to take the skulls. And so that is rather negative, but so, and then, but through reading the book that we learn so much more about him. And I think Mr. Kaufman does a nice job of talking about, his life and his work, and then also showing some things that aren't so nice about him or ethical. But without too much, not a whole lot of judgment, so that we can see that Audubon was just a human being.
Some things that I had learned earlier, that he ran some stores, he and his wife ran some shops, but John James was not the best shopkeeper. He had a lot. His wife did an awful lot. He also really didn't give credit to people who did some of the artwork, especially the plant life that were in the drawings or in his book. So yeah, again, I learned a lot more about him and from this book.
Okay. If you get a chance to see this painting, it's at the Cleveland Museum of Art. It's been hanging for a good while, and it's quite remarkable. Again, it's life size and quite dramatic. I did learn from the book that he often did not paint his backgrounds. His engraver, Havel, was extremely skilled as a painter and engraver. And he also had a student who helped, and he did have other people contribute to his backgrounds. What about him as an artist? Mr. Kaufman goes over some of his development as an artist. I don't know it very well otherwise, just from the book. He was born in Haiti. He was born to a chambermaid. She died, and his father took him and his half-sister to France, and his mother, his father's wife, raised the children, and they had a lot. They had seems to have had a good childhood. And then when he was 18, he came to the United States. And he came to his father had a place called Mill Grove, and father wanted him to manage it, and he wasn't really into managing. So he started doing his thing with sketching birds and also working and doing other things. But the book talks a little bit about sketching phoebes, who he had a chance to observe while he was painting outdoors. They were in a cave, and he could observe them quite intimately. But it was just impossible to really draw a living bird, he found. And then he had a eureka idea. Oh, if I could mount these birds on a board, and he used wires, he was able to then put birds into all kinds of positions to best show off their feathers and their shape. And he could also then design a position. So that helped him very much. And I think we today would be surprised at how many of those ornithologists had to shoot birds in order to actually have a specimen that they could study and or paint. So a fateful moment in birding history happened in March 1810 when Alexander Wilson walked into Audubon's store, and Alexander Wilson had developed his birding and painting skills, and he was offering his book and paintings as a subscription. And he showed it to Audubon, who seemed to have been somewhat enthusiastic until his business partner said, you are such a good painter, you don't really need this. So he did not get a subscription from Alexander Wilson. They did some hunting together, not a whole lot else. Kenn Kaufman seems to think maybe that this was a seed for Audubon to get going on his project of doing a book about all the birds of America, and write a textbook about it and sell it as a subscription. So he got an idea about how he could actually do this. It did take him many years before he actually got started on it. And as Nancy mentioned, he did have a business, and that business got into trouble related to some other economic issues of the day. It took him a while to get going. Wilson did note when he saw the drawings of Audubon, he said, he examined Mr. A's drawings in crayons. Very good. So Alexander Wilson, a very important figure, and we don't really know about him today, unfortunately. He was born in Scotland, 1766. He's 19 years older than Audubon. So he's got a kind of an edge on him, because he gets to America and starts discovering all these birds before Audubon gets a chance. And here you can see one of his paintings, and it's on a dead stick, that Audubon criticized. But Wilson's idea was to keep it all on the birds, not have other information. But it's pretty decent for artwork. And then his text, American Ornithology, or the Natural History of the Birds of the United States, was like the reference book. And he was a good scientist, a good birder, and he was very well respected in the community. Here's a picture of one of the birds that bears his name. Anybody want to say what this little cute little bird is?
That's a Wilson's warbler.
It is a Wilson's warbler. Yes, it's so cute, isn't it? So Audubon then, it did take a while for him to get going into early 1820s, but then he created this spectacular collection of plates, Birds of America, and it was printed over several years, 1827 to 1838, 435 plates, and huge, that elephant folio size. And again, he tried to make his birds life size. And then accompanying that is the text about and description of birds, and it's pretty good reading. It's interesting and kind of lively, ornithological biography. Later then, he did come out with another edition, and it's much smaller, much more affordable, and it had more plates, 500 plates, and that's a Royal Octavo edition of 7 volumes. So another major work. His sons became involved in his business. One became more business oriented. The other one was a really decent artist. I wanted to just show for people, if you haven't seen, if you go to the Audubon website, you can get to this site that has a collection of all of Audubon's plates. And you can put in a bird name here, click apply, and it will take you to that plate. And it's fantastic to play with and to look, and very wonderful site. We're so lucky to have this technology today. And then here's an example of one of his birds, and you can enlarge it and look at every detail. And I had a lot of fun doing that too. Well, let's get now to some of the unethical and things about Audubon that, well, what should we think about this? There are 2 examples here. The Louisiana hawk, which we know today as Harris's hawk, and then the bird of Washington, which is this on the right. But the Louisiana hawk, the story about this is that a specimen of a bird that was thought to be new came from a guy named Jenkins in Mississippi, and he sent it to the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia, which was the premier natural history institution of the day. Audubon had been nominated to be a member there, and he was not accepted the first time around. And that was a big blow to him. But so this specimen came to the Academy with a manuscript by Jenkins, and he thought it was new, and he gave it the name. He named it for Morton, who was the secretary of the Academy of Natural Sciences. Well, somehow, in between the time of the specimen being sent and the meeting in which it was supposed to be presented, Audubon came through on his way to England, and he seemed to acquire this. What did he borrow it? Was a payment for that the Academy owed him because they bought one of his subscriptions and they hadn't paid him. But over a period of time, he claimed this, that he discovered it. And then he called it this Falco heresy, named for his friend Edward Harris, that he did some birding discovery trips with. So Jenkins knew about it. He figured it out what happened. And it seems that people in the Academy knew what happened. But was there a confrontation? We don't really have that information. I think Mr. Kaufman tried to sort it all out. The other picture here, the bird of Washington, this is, Audubon says he discovered this bird, and he said it's, in the eagle family, it's all brown. He said it's 25% larger than bald eagles. And so he claimed it was a new species, and he presented it that way. And it was discovered then over time because the plumage changes in eagles was sorted out over this time. Wilson kind of got the idea that perhaps the all-brown eagle is a juvenile or somewhere related to the bald eagle. So Audubon took this information with him to England and made a big splash in England. He was revered and honored. And he never did recant that this was not really a new bird. So that's a bird of Washington, and he capitalized on the charisma that George Washington had at the time. Would anybody like to comment on about these stories or any other thing that you know about Audubon's alternative facts and about his plagiarism?
He did not appear to be very concerned about veracity.
Right.
And I mean, Kaufman calls him a great marketer, and that's what I hate about marketing.
Yes.
That he needed something special then, and so he fabricated something. I think that's just awful.
Yeah.
Didn't it go down generations too? Like in like the very beginning, I swear it talked about like his granddaughter even covering up untruths. Like, what is this like multi-generational narcissistic lying? Like it runs in the family, I guess.
Yeah, apparently some of the notes and things she burned. She got rid of them. So the truth is not going to be known very well. But I think Ken did a great job of really digging up the dirt.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
I really enjoyed reading how um the different men would throw shade at each other in their books. That was a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It was, I think that chapter, it's called too, feuding in Philadelphia. And it showed these various men and how they got along and how they didn't get along and the grudges that they kept. And so very interesting dynamics.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
I was just gonna comment, not to be a cynic, but I don't think it's that uncommon that the most kind of famous scientist is not necessarily the best one. Like there's other historical examples of that happening, and I'm sure it's happening now. I think it's a different set of skills to be like famous and a good marketer than to be like a really rigorous scientist.
Yes.
Yeah.
I came to admire Alexander Wilson in this because he did so much of the work. He wrote the text, he painted the pictures, and then he had to, he fortunately was able to find a publisher, but then he had to go, and like Audubon too, they had to go sell subscriptions. And back in the early 19th century, that was not an easy thing to do. So.
And Hoffman mentions that he was like socially awkward,
Yes.
but then was like very, very passionate and very focused. And so that made me think about if Wilson was like on the spectrum somewhere and how much more difficult that would have been going door to door, with that anxiety.
Yeah.
Also, I just felt like Wilson had a lot more passion. Like Audubon's passion didn't seem to be birds, it seemed to be himself,
Mhm.
whereas Wilson's passion was birds, and that was evident. At least that's what I took away from it.
Mm-hmm. To help me kind of keep this straight, I put together several of the ornithologists that are talked about in the book, and really it's such a good overview of the history. And I didn't include everybody, but this helped me to stay organized and also kind of chronology. So starting here in the center with this is an ivory-billed woodpecker that Catesby saw in when he was in the United States in the South. So he got to see one. We haven't been. So Catesby was born in the early 1700s. So he's one of the first ones. Then Linnaeus lived in the 18th century. And then Linnaeus too was in the 18th century, and his binomial nomenclature set the stage for how life was going to be scientifically described. And then Bartram is considered like one of the first American ornithologists over here. And Wilson was born in 1766, died in 1813. So he was only 47. George Ord was a contemporary of Wilson and a champion, and he continued his American ornithology for several editions. Then Audubon, 1785 to 1851. Nuttall, Thomas Nuttall, a contemporary of Audubon. Swainson, too, they're about contemporary. Bachman, he's a little bit 1790, and he lived a good while into the 19th century. Bonaparte, this was so fun to hear about Napoleon's nephew, who was such a great scientist and was in the United States for 3 to 4 years and made such a difference. He and Audubon got along, interestingly. And then we have Townsend. I put Darwin in here. He's not really talked about too much in this book, but he was 1809 to 1882, I think, and he was on the Beagle from 1831 to 36. So he's doing that while Audubon's doing his Birds of America. And then Spencer Baird comes later, and he kind of revolutionized learning parts of ornithology, but he would collect so many specimens so that he had a huge number of specimens upon which to make decisions about species and so forth. Some other resources, Kenn Kaufman's Facebook page. There's a wonderful interview with David Lindo of the Urban Birder that was just done recently in December. And it's very conversational. It's a fun interview. And then this next Master Painter YouTube just continually plays all the plates of Audubon. So you can have it stream for yourself. And then again, the National Audubon Society, the plates that are available there. Is there anything anybody would like to say, add, anything more about the book?
Did anybody know like much about Wilson before reading this? And I don't know if so, like, is what you read in line with what you thought?
I only knew that he had discovered some birds, and I knew Wilson's warbler. That's about it. Sorry to say.
Yeah, in the chat, Deborah says, haven't read much of this book, but reading about Wilson has been the best discovery so far. So again, everybody's discovering something in the book.
Yeah, I liked the book. I haven't finished it. I read skimmed more than half of it. And I think the bird anecdotes are my favorite part. More so than I get a little bogged down with some of the names and the back and forth, like the thrushes chapter. I was like, oh my gosh. Yeah, I was curious if you guys have read Kenn Kaufman's other books. I don't know how many he's written, and whether, because he talks a bit about his own birding adventures in this, and so I was curious like how this compares to his other works. I haven't read any other ones.
I have not. I want to though.
Yeah.
I read Kingbird Highway quite a while ago, and that's pretty much his travels as a young person, hitchhiking across the country and seeing things. It's been a while, and my memory is fading, but this is a quite a different book where Ken does a ton of research and is trying to bring out some of the things that we just didn't know about some of these early naturalists.
Yeah, he tells a few stories in here that I've heard kind of just through word of mouth, but he has them, the whole very complete story of what happened, and I liked that as kind of a reference.
Now, Drina, I think you mentioned about the Phoebe, and that Audubon saw it in a cave. It was nesting in a cave. Is that right? And he said he had a hard time drawing it from a living. So of course,
Yes.
he pinned it and shot him and pinned him. But I also had read that Audubon may have been one of the first people to try to figure out, is this the same bird coming back to nest in an area?
Oh,
So I understood he tied a silver thread to the leg of a living Eastern Phoebe and released it. And then the next year it did show back up. Now, is this the truth? I don't know. After all I'm reading now, but is this kind of the initial bird banding?
yeah,
Just trying to figure out, gee, is this bird the same one that keeps coming back to the same area?
yeah.
Well, we often say like, oh, he did this or he said that. And I mean, as we saw in the book, like they've got teams of people doing stuff, and then it's just under their name and no credit is given. Almost makes me think of like a corporation. And it's, this was a time when people passed away earlier. It's like, I'm sorry, you did what before you turned 50? Like, no, something's not adding up. And so it's unfortunate that we say like, well, he did this and he did that. Cause it's like, after what I've read, I feel like he probably wasn't one to like actually go out and tie this string. I could see, some kid essentially doing that.
So having the idea was supposed to be the same thing as doing? Good question. I would like to go back to the shooting the birds to take picture, to have them stabilized so that you could draw them and paint them. And my question is, how else were they going to do it? I mean, they could maybe have caught them and put them in cages and then painted them from life, but boy, I don't know.
Right.
And shooting them and having to paint them quickly before they deteriorated, that wouldn't be the best thing either.
Couldn't really keep them that long.
Yeah. And with not having a camera was just so limiting to them.
Or binoculars. I just like,
Yes.
oh my God.
I was trying to imagine how you could shoot a warbler with a shotgun and have any warbler left to paint.
They probably went through a few of them before they got a specimen that was kind of sort of complete.
Wow.
I don't know. Yeah. Funny, but not funny.
Yeah.
Oh, somebody in the chat, Deborah mentioned, there's a book called A Season on the Wind, that Kaufman wrote to learn about bird migration. So there's another one. So again, a little bit more research as opposed to, hey, a travelogue of me traveling all over North America or hitchhiking.
Okay, well, our next book discussion is going to be April 29th, Tuesday, again at 7 o'clock, and it is The Big Year by Mark O'Masick. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly. And also, we're suggesting that people watch the movie, and so it might add a little bit of fun to the discussion about the book too. So we'll talk about the book and the movie. So thanks, everybody.
I thank you everyone for joining in and adding your comments, questions, perspectives. This has been really, really wonderful. And again, stay warm, stay healthy, and have a good evening, everyone. Appreciate you, everyone joining in.
Thank you.
Good night.